right. Let's take a look at our brand new animation environment in Houdini 20, including the built-in physics for such things as Ragdoll and dynamic motion. And it's all with the viewport-centric workflow for animators. So first of all, we're going to take a look at some posing and animation. And we're just going to go through some workflow things such as selection sets, our new volatile hotkey, Control-Shift, moving controls around any pivot, and posing IK in a FK manner. And some of the tools and features we'll go over some of our animation sliders, locators, and constraints. So as I mentioned, we're going to be working entirely in the viewport here, but just at the beginning, I just wanted to keep this panel open. It's our selection set panel, and this is for loading and copying and saving out files of your selection sets. And we also do our mirroring and everything in there. But once you have that set up, you have your selection sets loaded in, get rid of that panel. Let's just work in the viewport because now we have our selection set HUDs here. And this is more than just selection sets. It's also our display groups. So we could turn characters and controls on and off as we want. And we also use it as our channel groups for keying. So you could pin your sets to make sure that you're guaranteed to key everything in that set, similar to the way the channel groups worked in the graph editor. And the next thing we have, we could throw it in, is that we have our handle here that you could see, but we have a lot of parameters in there. So you can change the line width of it, you can change the scale factor of it, there's the brightness, so there's a bunch of options in there. So you can change your handle to however you like working with it. I prefer a nice chunkier handle as I work through everything. And the other thing I want to mention as we go through here is something that you can't see, and I meant is our new volatile hotkey, which is Control-Shift. And that will allow us to rotate around our controls around any pivot. So let me take a look and show you what that means. Okay, so here we have Electra. And she's simple rig. She's just got IK arms and legs. She doesn't have any FK in them. So typically, if you wanted to rotate the arms with the waist, with the IK, they would just rotate around their own axes, or they translate around their own orientation that rigging set up for us. But now by holding Control-Shift, now you could do, you can rotate them as groups together, and you can translate them as groups together as well. So this opens up a lot of possibilities for posing. And one of the things that we'll do is just have a little display here. I just have a set called FK helpers. They're not typical controls in a way that they deform the rig or anything. It's just exposing the pivots for me to use as I rotate, so I can use it to rotate around. So for example, with our normal IK arm, if I wanted to rotate it, move it up, you would translate it up. You could rotate it to the hand, and then you could translate it up and rotate the hand. That's typical IK kind of situation. But now by selecting the shoulder, I can rotate around that pivot. I can rotate around that pivot. For the elbow, now I can rotate that around. So effectively, I'm posing my IK control in an FK manner, and it's still just being in an IK control. So I have a set here just for the legs, just so really quickly to be able to select things. And I'm going to just do the same thing as I select that. Now I can use the hip pivot, and I can rotate it out, rotate it across, and I can do the same for the knee. And I can even use a pole vector that doesn't have a rotate on it, but I could still use that to rotate the IK foot. So you can get a lot of different ways of posing things, all while still being IK and being able to pose it wherever you want as normal. This also allows us to move large groups of controls around. So just with the set, now I can invert Electra really quickly, and I can throw her arm down, still just with an IK. And if we wanted to balance her on our finger, what we could do, we got finger control, so we could turn those on, and because it's a control, that means it's a pivot. That means we can use that as a pivot to rotate her around. So, and you can also have the handle down close by it. So you can move it closer so it's not so far away, just with your last selection. And then we can balance Electra on our fingertip. And if we wanted to do it, dangle her by our foot, all we have to do is select the foot, and now we can rotate it from up there without any fancy switches, without any fancy setup in your rig. And you can translate and move it, but still, when you don't use the volatile hotkey, it just moves as normal. And so as you're posing, you can use an IK just by posing it around, but then you can just select the elbow, and now you're posing it kind of in an FK manner. So lots of flexibility there. And now the next thing I want to do is our new G key. This will bring up a little HUD for ourselves. So if I select the hand control, for example, you can see all the values come up there. I can use my ladder now to adjust them and fine tune them if needed. We can also snap controls together. We can copy paste things, all that stuff. But in this case, I'm just going to select everything and just revert everything to default. So essentially, a rig has so many pivots already in it when it's built. An animator should be able to use them. But what if you want to use a pivot that's not part of the character? Let's take a look at that next. Okay, so here we have just the simplest of rigs. It's just a point down there, just to position a chair around. So, but I want to do some more with it. So if we hold down B, we now have a radial menu that can allow us to get into our animation tools. In this case, I'm just going into a locator tool, and we could just drop down a locator here. And with this locator, we have a few other things that we could do with it, because it's not just going to be a null there. We can use the middle mouse button, and by shift and middle, we can now change the shape for everything. And if you just use the middle mouse wheel, now you can change the size as well. So you can really quickly, an animator can set up what they want. In this case, I just put a couple of locators down, and now that now I can go back out to animate it, and I can use them as pivots. So really easily, I can tilt the chair back and tilt the chair forward. So it's very straightforward, very simple. But what we want to do now is add a lecture to the chair. And so now lecture's sitting in the chair, and I've just set up a couple of sets for myself, a tilt back and a tilt forward. And just by isolating them, I can get the controls to show up and selecting it. Now when I rotate it, I can rotate a lecture and the chair together, but it's not constrained at all. They're just completely separate. It's just how you're moving groups of controls together. So you don't have to deal with the constraint there. And I have a tilt forward as well. And in this case, I just didn't include the feet on it, so they stay flat on the ground. But if I wanted to include them for any reason, just shift select, add them in. So you can quickly add and remove as needed. And so from here, I just use this, and I just did a simple little animation of lecture rocking back in the chair, standing up and sitting down. Very straightforward. And what I'd like to do next is kind of look at it, doing a breakdown, adding another key in here so I see my two keys and what I'd like to do. So now's a good time to take a look at our new animation sliders. And you can see there's too many down there to talk about in this short amount of time. So I'll just go over a couple of my favorites personally. And these are fully customizable, by the way. You can decide what and where those sliders go. In this case, I'm going to just shift them to extra wide, just so we could see them a little bit better for this demo. So now that I have them here, and I'm just going to use blend to neighbor. And so I have my left key and the right key, and by selecting tilt back, now I could just drag it to the left, favor the left key, favor the right key. If I hold shift down, I can overshoot the key as well and just go past that. So really quickly, multiple groups, multiple characters, lots of key groups, and I can just use a slider to move everything together. And the next thing, one I want to use is blend to frame. I love this one because I could just blend it to any frame I want. In this case, I know Electra's sitting at frame 1 and she's standing at frame 50. So now we could just make her stand up, sit down, as much as we want, anywhere in between. Really quickly, we've been able to get an extra pose, start our breakdown, and we can continue animating on from there. So very handy just to be able to use a simple slider to move multiple controls around in groups. Okay, so one of the first things the animator does when they get a shot assigned to them is they gather reference together. In this case, I just went out back and I just shot a video of myself, just doing a pole thrust, giving myself an idea of what that motion should look like as I start blocking out the shot. But I wanted a second view, so I shot another view of myself just from the side, but I don't have a 2-camera setup, so obviously the timing is not lining up. You can see the pole thrust isn't there. So we have a lot of options now. So we can actually trim our shot in there. We can change the start and end frame of it. But in this case, I just sped up the shot. And now we have that movement. Now it's all lining up. I have more information for posing and starting my animation from 2 different angles. So really good quality of life because it allows us to edit our videos right in our viewports. All right, so here's another example of just sets and using our pivots. So there's no constraints in here at all. This is just a setup, like I said, with our sets and deciding what pivot. So really quickly, I can just use that one control and I can move all my characters together. Again, not having to deal with any constraints or turning things on or off. Really quickly, we can just pose out our characters very simply. And once we set a key on that, we could still go in, everything's kind of holding together, and we could still use our sliders in between. And as we go blending between them, they all stay connected, again, without needing any constraints. Here's another example. So this is a 5 pivot setup I did. Normally people, you may get a constraint and have driven and driver, and you may have a grab and release on here. In this case, again, I didn't want to use any constraints. But what I can still do is just with what I select and what my last pivot is, and now I can move everything from the back hand. I can move everything from the front hand. I can use the pole to move everything around. I have some locators that are attached at the back and end of it, and I can use those, again, to move everything if you're digging it in or someone's holding the end of the pole, and same with the back. Still using the CLG, we can just rotate everything around as well. So instead of having a really complicated setup of what's going on for a constraint, which could be for this case and what's all happening, we can go a little bit simpler. And if I wanted to do a grab and release, instead of needing to manage that, all I do is, like my foot, I just don't include that control in it when I move it. So now I just set it a key when it's on, and when it's off, I just don't include it in that group. Very quickly, you have a grab and release without needing to manage anything. And so I've talked a lot about not needing constraints. So let's take a look at an example of where I have. So if you see the screen left hand, I've just, if it plays, yeah, it's playing. I've just deleted some keys, so it's very obvious that it's coming off the pole. So what do we want to do? We want to put it back on the pole, obviously. So if we just go into our constraint tool, we select our driven, driver, hit H, and you can see it's turned gray, so we know it's constrained. And now we have our hand constrained to the pole. And as we scrub through, it's all locked on. But I want to put this on the key on my actual control. And we can open up our constraint HUD here, and we have a few options, and we can enable and disable the constraints. So just as you toggle it, you can see where it was, where it's constrained, when it wasn't, where it is. So we just select that control, set a key on it, and now when we disable it, we're locked on its place exactly where it was. So again, we could just go down a little bit farther to another key to do the exact same thing. So it's locked on, and then we just select the control, we set a key on it, and then when we disable it, it's locked on space. Now we got our hand all locked on perfectly. But if you wanted to do it every frame, you may want it like very close up and get it all locked on. You can just drag it out the timeline and bake that range. And now with the constraint disabled, you don't have to worry about the constraint anymore. You got the keys all on there if you need to do any more animation. So instead of having the constraints being driving how all this movement is happening, instead I'm just using the constraints to kind of correct any fixes that need to be done. All right, let's go into some Ragdoll and some dynamic motion that we have. So for Ragdoll, we'll just take a look at adding complex motion onto characters. We're going to go over recording keys onto characters and allowing animators to have control of where those keys go. And in dynamic motion, we're just going to go through adding physics to your animation, which is very important sometimes. Some quick adjustments and changes that you can do, and to easily put the results back onto your controls. So here we just have a work in progress shot that's going on, just the 3 jump with Electra, and you can see it's very rough still. There's like, especially there's lots of speed ups and slow downs right there. It's, just a work in progress going along. And you may notice at the bottom of the screen there, some colored lines, and these are our new animation bookmarks. So what you could do is you could set them up. I just set one up for each jump, and you double click in there, and now you can focus on that area that you want to animate on. And you can jump between the bookmarks really quickly, so you can go focus on 1, 2, 3 if you want to just play those back and just make sure that they are all working. And you can double click when it's out. So it's really good, especially on a long animation shot, to have a bunch of them set up so you can quickly focus in and you don't have to deal with that whole long timeline. And you can see we have a bookmark editor here where you could turn them on and off, change color, change timing. You could do that all there as well. But you can also just do it right in the toolbar, so you can just grab them and shift them as needed. You can grab the ends so you can retime them. Do the all setup there. So there's lots of ways to do that, either the bookmark editor or right on there. So as I look at this, I would probably start working on the jump to area. I'd probably jump in there and start focusing on it because that's the roughest. But let's go into dynamic motion because this will help us out immensely instead of doing it by hand and eyeballing it the whole time. So as we jump in there, it's very simple to set up. The first thing you would do is just, in this case, I'm just selecting the COG and I'm making that my center of mass by hitting H. And now you can see that horrible curve as the work in progress is. Really not nice at all, but it's a good representation of, okay, this is where we were for it. The next thing we want to do is we just want to set our takeoff frame. And you could do whatever frame. In this case, I'm just using frame 24. I hit H, I start my motion, and you can see the gray curve going on there. And I just set my endpoint that I wanted. And now I have a much better looking curve. Spacing is all physically accurate, built for us. I'm just going to do the exact same thing with the second one, my takeoff frame, and I'm going to pick my landing frame. Again, now we get physically accurate motion and spacing built for us. All while keeping the same keys in there and not adjusting the keys in between. And so for the last one, just doing the same thing, and I'll probably just do, I'll do it on the foot contact there, and I'll set my key there, and now we have all of our animation. As I play it back, you can see just with a few clicks within less than a minute there, I have much, much better motion rather than having to hand key that and eyeball it. But you can also see we could still make creative changes. That's not just the results. So if I want to raise up Electra all throughout here, if I want to change her height at all in here, I can just grab these planes and now I can select them and adjust her in height. So I can change how she's motion. I'm not locked into what it was before and just the default result from it. I can do some creative choices that we may want in there. And so now, again, play it through really quickly. We got the higher jump, the better spacing, the physically accurate arcs, and we're good to go. But sometimes sets change on us. And in this case, maybe a big block comes in the middle of our jump, and this could take us quite a while to redo by hand, but let's just take a look at it, what we do. And all we have to do is select these handles, and now I can just shift everything up, and I can put Electra onto that block, and all the other motion, all my keyframe in between stays there, and we still get all the physical accurate, and we could still do all the little fine-tuning things like grabbing it and, little finicky things that an animation supervisor may want to just change at the last minute. And we can get all that creative stuff in there. So really quickly, we've improved the motion physically. It's now correct. We've been able to do creative choices, and we've been able to handle a problem with our set update. So now I want to get this back onto our character, and all I'm going to do here is we have just update keys. And this is just going to take my existing keys that I had in the rough animation that you saw, and it's just going to move them to correct spots. So now, really quickly, I've just, in a couple minutes, improved this animation quite a bit, and now I still have just the exact same keys that I had there. You can still bake it out every frame or every second. There's lots of options in there, but I like the update key one since it just keeps my spacing that I had before, but where it should be. And so we'll just look at it again, just so you can see the very rough motion here, especially in this area. You can see all that stuttering in there. It's just eyeballed hand, and now the result. Just a couple of minutes later, with all the changes, now jumping on another block. And you can make these jump over the buildings too. It's you just pull out where that is, and all the animation would remain the same. All right, so here's another example. We're in London, so I had to do a football shot, not soccer, football. And I just stepped in, did some stepped animation here, where I just have Electra just kicking the ball around just with the contacts. And as I go into start working on the animation for Electra, you can see here, I've worked on Electra, started doing that, but I haven't touched the ball at all. It's just hitting its contacts, and it's just interpolating to where it's going. So again, this could take a long time hand keying, trying to guess how high it should go. So let's go into dynamic motion and let it help us out. Doing the exact same thing, setting the starts and ends here. Now, really quickly, I get physically accurate motion built for us, just based on its contacts. And now we have her kicking the ball around, which is great. But again, let's get this onto our control. So in this case, I'm just going to bring in our graph editor just so we can take a look here. And you can see our TY. And when I look at it here, you can see the contact keys and how spliny that motion was. So we'll bring up our baking tool again. And in this case, I'm going to use bake essential keys. And this will just give us the fewest keys needed to represent that motion. So you see the spliny curve, and now we have a really nice looking curve with very simple keys ready to animate and go without having to bake every frame together. And so, again, really quickly, just with a few clicks, now we have all that spliny motion, but now we have the nice bouncy kicky motion on our keys ready to go. And while we're here with the graph editor, we've had a lot of improvements here, and here's just a few. So now when you select your keys, you use the middle mouse button, you move it vertically, it will constrain it in value. And if you move it horizontally first, it'll constrain it in time. We also have our vertical adapt on here. So if you move it out of frame, it will readjust for you. And I really like this one because it saves so much time when you're doing curve management, because you can zoom in, you can pan across, you can add controls, you can add curves. It will always keep it framed. So when you're doing that curve and key management, you can really quickly go and see where things need to be adjusted. Here's another one. In this case, this happens a lot. There's overlapping keys, and I just want to use TXs, but it can be kind of tricky sometimes to just grab the keys on the curve that you want. So now you can just grab that curve, you hold down S, and when you drag it over, it'll only select the keys on that channel. And for those that like to use tangents and Bezier handles for adjusting the curves, we still have those, but we have another tool here to try out, curve pulling. So when now you can just select right on that curve and just start adjusting it just by pulling. So that would be interesting to give a go. But for me, I usually just use auto slope, selecting everything and keeping it on auto slope. And again, so we'll just go through really quickly. You can see this spliny little motion just going to the contacts. And really quickly, now we get the really nice motion with very little effort, still fully keyable for the animator since we have all our keys right on it. All right, so let's take a look at Ragdoll now. So in this example, white Electra, the top Electra, I have barely done any animation. I've just moved her up and down and started the throw. You can even see the hands intersecting with the leg, and there's very little motion on here. So let's see what Ragdoll can do for us. So with our Ragdoll setup, you can see it here, and I'm just going to open up our HUD and just toggle offset. So now we can see these two together and see what's happening. And so with our Ragdoll setup that we've got, as I press play, you can see that the hand's no longer intersecting at all. We got some motion now on the legs and the head and the arms, and we're ready to go. And you can see, if you wanted to change anything, you just select the part of the rig, and you can hold G, and now you get your HUD, where you could set your stiffness, your dampening, all the things when it's turning on and when it's turning off. So now we have our motion, we got the throw, the toss, and hitting into the chair, and all that nice detail. Again, now we want to work on getting this onto our character. And we could do this several ways. And one of the ways it's doing is just selecting what controls you want to put it on. So I just have a set here, which is just the arms, legs, and head. And if I go down, you can see I'm just going to start recording poses. And I don't want to bake it every frame. I have my key set up the way I prefer to do it. So I just want to update them. And now, just as I go through the keys, now you can see my controls are being updated based on the Ragdoll result. And I don't have to go all the way. I'm just doing it on the keys that I want to do it on. And so I can stop the recording. And what we now have, that Ragdoll, Very sparse keys on there, really easy, the way I would like to continue animating with it on. And we have no more intersection, and now we have some movement on the foot. So good spot for me to start going from there. But I want to get all this nice tossing and throwing and all the detail into the chair as well. It's essentially the same thing. And you can see here, I've just actually jumped into a bookmark, so now we could just focus on that area. So I'm going to just do the exact same thing, except I'm going to select a different set that has more controls in it. And I could do the chair at the same time, but I'm going to just show you as an example doing it separately. So the exact same thing, I could start recording poses. And the thing I love about this is I don't have to use the whole result of the ragdoll. If I just see a few poses in there, I can just grab these. If that's a key pose I like, that's a key pose I like, that's a key pose, I can just stop there. And now I can continue animating without having to worry about all that extra data that comes along. But in this case, we do have the collision with the chair and lecture. So there's a certain area, I'm like, let me just make sure I get every frame on there just to get all that detailed motion. And so if I just hold it down and drag across, you can see it's giving me recording every frame. You can also hit play to do the same thing. So I just stopped a little bit early because I plan on doing some animation, and I could just set a key at the end. But in this case, I want to have it just matching the whole way through, so I'm just going to, again, drag all the way through. And now really quickly, if you look at the two of them, we've just recorded all the ragdoll motion onto our character's controls, and except for the chair, because I decided to do this separately. So let's do the chair now. And as we turn on the chair, because we don't need all those keys that Electra needed as she's flying through the air, now we could do the chair separately, so we don't need all that extra data. Let's just do it right before the contact, and now we could just drag it on there, again, every frame, just because I want to get all that detailed motion. And so stop recording, and now between the two of them, we have gotten all the motion that we want and that we'd like to do, and we could start either using that or just right as is, or start continuing animating if we wanted. So let's just go back out to animation. And there we go. So what this has allowed us to do is it allowed us to key what characters we want, what controls we want, when we want those keys, and how dense we want those keys. So it allows a lot of flexibility to, instead of the default, let's brute force bake everything on every character, and then having the animator having to go through and clean that up, they can decide it as they go. And so again, here's the straight out of the ragdoll just by recording it on, so flopping into the chair. And here's one where I just did a little bit of animation based on it. I turned her head a little bit, just added a few things, and instead of flopping, I made her sit up. So really quickly, you can just adjust it and quickly get the ragdoll motion, and then use it to animate for your stuff. And finally, you can see here, we have our 3 characters, and I just added Ragdoll to it with a lot of the other tools that we use there. And it's really quick to be able to, will this play again? Oh, well. All right. We'll just end it there then. So thank you very much.
No. Questions? Questions? No questions. Next. Seriously, no questions? Oh, yep. Oh, shit. I can't go through there. Oops, thanks.
Hi. Those quick locators, like temporary locators that you use to change the pivot, can you place them into an animated object, or they're going to be just where you position them at first and that's it?
The locators for the chair and everything?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, because with the pole one, I'm not sure I mentioned it, but the locators that are at the end were attached to the pole so that they could be there as well. So, so you can move it. You'll have to see it, like play around to see, because if you're moving it, it depends how you want to do it. But yeah, and you can actually chain those together. I think in Esther's one, she shows putting locators together. So you can build a little FK locator thing so that you could do things as well and use them around. So you should be able to use them at like wherever you want. Experiment with them. I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of this stuff, I was like, let me try this and see how it turns out. But yeah, you should be able to animate them, have them constrained to other objects, have them just in space, or however you want to do it. So,
Thanks. Great
Yep.
tool.
Anyone else? Okay, thanks,
right.
Warren.
well, thank you very much, everyone.